If you're watching this at night, you might want to leave a light on. I know, it sounds like a cliche, something your parents might have said when you were a kid, just before they turned off the hallway lamp and left you alone with your imagination. But trust me, after what I've seen, I don't say it lightly. It started with something so ordinary, so forgettable, that I almost convinced myself it never happened. I woke up at 3:07 a.m. Not 3 o'clock, not 3:15, 3:07, exactly. My alarm clock's red digits glowed in the dark, casting a faint, artificial halo across my nightstand. The street outside was silent, the kind of silence that feels heavy, like the world is holding its breath. I could hear the hum of my old refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant bark of a dog 2 blocks over, the soft rustle of leaves against my window. Normal things. Safe things. Then I heard a sound that didn't belong. A whisper, so faint I thought it was just the wind. But it wasn't the wind. It was a voice, low and urgent, threading through the darkness just outside my window. I froze, every muscle in my body tensed, listening. The voice was saying something, but I couldn't make out the words. It was like someone was reciting a secret, just out of reach, daring me to come closer. I wanted to believe it was nothing. Maybe a neighbor talking on the phone, or a stray cat brushing against the glass. But the voice kept coming back, night after night, always at 3:07. Sometimes it was closer, sometimes farther away, but always there, just beneath the surface of the night. I started searching for answers, desperate to prove I wasn't losing my mind. That's when I found the posts, the confessions, the stories, the warnings from people who'd heard the same whispers, seen the same shadows. They were scattered across forums, buried in comment sections, hidden in the darkest corners of the internet. And they all said the same thing. Once you hear the night whisper, you're never really alone again. But that was just the beginning. I'm not the only one. Here are the stories that kept me up at night. When I first moved into the apartment, I felt like I'd finally made it. It was nothing fancy, just a cramped one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building that had seen better decades, but it was mine. The walls were thin, the pipes groaned, and the elevator had a habit of stopping between floors, but I didn't care. I was 23, fresh out of college, and the world felt wide open. My roommate, Jamie, was a friend from high school who'd landed a job in the city. We spent the first night eating takeout on the floor, laughing about the weird stains on the carpet and the ancient, yellowed wallpaper that peeled at the corners. The first week was a blur of unpacking, assembling cheap furniture, and getting lost in the maze of hallways that all looked the same. At night, the building settled with creaks and sighs, but I told myself it was just old bones adjusting to new life. I slept with my window cracked open, letting in the city's distant hum, and for a while, I felt safe. But then the dream started. I'd wake up in the middle of the night, heart pounding, convinced someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. I'd stare at the sliver of light beneath the door, waiting for a shadow to pass by. Nothing ever did. I blamed it on stress, on too much caffeine, on the unfamiliar sounds of a new place. One night, I got up to use the bathroom. The hallway was pitch black, the kind of darkness that feels thick, almost physical. As I stepped out, I saw it a shape, darker than the shadows, standing at the far end of the hall. It didn't move. It didn't make a sound. I blinked and it was gone. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light, but the image stuck with me, gnawing at the edges of my mind. The next morning, over burnt toast and instant coffee, I tried to laugh it off. "Did you see anything weird last night?" I asked Jamie, keeping my tone casual. She looked up from her phone, frowning. "Like what?" "I don't know. I thought I saw someone in the hallway. Must have been half asleep." She shrugged. "This place is creepy at night. I keep hearing footsteps when I'm in bed. Probably just the neighbors." I wanted to believe her. I really did. But the feeling of being watched only got worse. Sometimes, I'd catch a glimpse of movement out of the corner of my eye, a flicker of darkness that vanished when I turned my head. The air in the hallway felt colder than the rest of the apartment, heavy with something I couldn't name. I started leaving the bathroom light on at night, just to keep the shadows at bay. A week later, Jamie burst into my room at 2 a.m., her face pale and eyes wide. "Did you see it?" she whispered. I sat up, adrenaline spiking. "See what?" She hesitated, glancing over her shoulder. There was someone in the hallway. I thought it was you, but it wasn't. It was just standing there, not moving. My skin crawled. What did it look like? She shook her head. I couldn't see. It was just dark, like a shadow, but thicker. I tried to turn on the light, but the switch wouldn't work. And then it was gone. We spent the rest of the night huddled in my room, listening to the silence. Neither of us slept. The next day, I started asking around. The building's super, an old man named Mr. Alvarez, just laughed when I mentioned the hallway. Every building's got its ghosts, he said, his eyes crinkling. This one's older than you think. Used to be a boarding house, back in the 20s. A lot of stories. People see things, hear things. Most of it's just the pipes. But there was something in his voice, a note of caution, that made me wonder. Jamie and I tried to ignore it, but the shadow kept coming back. Sometimes it was at the end of the hall, sometimes right outside our doors. We started sleeping with our doors locked, a chair wedged under the handle. We left lights on, played music, anything to drown out the feeling of being watched. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was coming from the hallway. I pressed my ear to the door, heart hammering, and heard footsteps slow, deliberate, moving closer. I held my breath, waiting for the shadow to pass by. The footsteps stopped right outside my door. I could feel it something on the other side, waiting. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen. Eventually, the footsteps faded and the whispering stopped. When I finally opened the door, the hallway was empty. But the air was cold, and the shadows seemed to cling to the walls a little longer than they should. I thought it was just my imagination until my roommate saw it too. And when I started digging into the building's history, I found stories, old newspaper clippings, faded photos, rumors of people who'd vanished in the night, never to be seen again. The shadow, they said, was always there, waiting in the hallway. I wish I could say that was the worst thing I've heard. But the next story, it's haunted me ever since. I used to think I knew my neighbors. You know, the way you know the people who live on your floor just enough to nod in the hallway, maybe exchange a few words about the weather or the broken elevator. But there was one neighbor I actually liked. Mr. Ellis. He lived across the hall, a retired teacher with a fondness for crossword puzzles and bad puns. He'd always greet me with a smile, sometimes slipping me a newspaper clipping or a piece of candy. He was the kind of person who made the building feel less lonely. But then, I started noticing something strange. It began with little things: Mr. Ellis forgetting conversations we'd had the day before, or looking confused when I mentioned something he'd told me. I chalked it up to age, maybe a touch of forgetfulness. But then I started hearing noises from his apartment in the middle of the night. Not the usual creaks and groans, but something else, like footsteps pacing back and forth, sometimes a low, anxious muttering. One night, I woke up thirsty and went to get a glass of water. As I passed my peephole, I saw Mr. Ellis standing in the hallway, staring at his own door. He looked lost, almost frightened. I was about to open the door and ask if he was okay, but then he turned and walked away, disappearing down the stairs. I checked the clock, 2:13 a.m. The next morning, I ran into him by the mailboxes. He was cheerful, as always, but when I asked if he'd had trouble sleeping, he just laughed. I slept like a rock, he said. Didn't hear a thing all night. I wanted to press him, but something in his eyes made me stop. After that, I started paying attention. Every night, at exactly 2:13 a.m., Mr. Ellis would leave his apartment. Sometimes he'd wander the halls. Sometimes he'd go outside and stand in the courtyard, staring up at the sky. And every morning, he'd be back in his apartment, acting as if nothing had happened. No memory, no explanation. I started keeping a journal. I thought I was losing my mind until I saw the footage. I set up a camera in my peephole just to prove to myself that I wasn't imagining things. The first few nights, the footage was uneventful, just grainy shots of the empty hallway, the flicker of the emergency exit sign. But then, on the fourth night, I caught it. At 2:13 a.m., Mr. Ellis stepped out of his apartment, looked around, and then vanished. Not walked away, not slipped out of frame, he just blinked out of existence, like someone had cut a frame from the film. I watched the footage over and over, trying to make sense of it. I even showed it to Jamie, who'd moved in down the hall after her own run-in with the shadow. She watched in silence, then looked at me with wide eyes. "You need to talk to someone about this," she whispered. "This isn't normal." "But who do you talk to about something like that? The police? The building manager?" I tried asking around, but no one wanted to talk about Mr. Ellis. Some people claimed they'd never seen him. Others said he'd lived there for years, but kept to himself. One old woman on the first floor just shook her head and muttered, "It's happening again." That's when I started digging. I found old records, news articles, even a few posts on obscure forums. Turns out, Mr. Ellis wasn't the first. Every few years, someone in the building would start acting strange, wandering at night, forgetting things, disappearing for hours at a time. Some of them moved away. Some just vanished. I confronted Mr. Ellis one morning, desperate for answers. "Do you ever have dreams you can't remember?" I asked. He smiled, but there was something brittle in his expression. "All the time." "Why do you ask?" "Because you disappear at night. You leave your apartment at exactly 2:13 a.m., and then you're just gone." He laughed, but it sounded forced. "You must be mistaken. I'm an old man. I barely make it out of bed, let alone out of the apartment." I showed him the footage. He watched, silent, his hands trembling. When it was over, he looked at me with tears in his eyes. "I don't remember any of this," he whispered. "But I believe you." That night, I stayed up, determined to follow him. At 2:13 a.m., he left his apartment, just like before. I trailed him down the stairs, out into the courtyard. He stood there, staring up at the sky, his face blank. I called his name, but he didn't respond. And then, right before my eyes, he vanished, gone in an instant, leaving nothing behind but the echo of his footsteps. I waited in the courtyard until dawn, shivering in the cold. When I finally went back upstairs, Mr. Ellis was in his apartment, making tea, as if nothing had happened. He didn't remember a thing. I still don't know where he goes, or what happens to him during those lost hours. But I'm not the only one who's noticed. There are others, other buildings, other neighborhoods, other stories. It's a pattern, repeating itself, over and over. If you think that's strange, wait until you hear what happened to the next person. There's a certain comfort in late-night scrolling. The world is quiet, the city's chaos reduced to a distant hum, and the blue glow of my phone screen feels like a shield against the dark. I'd gotten into the habit of staying up too late, doom scrolling through news, memes, and the endless parade of other people's lives. It was a routine, a way to keep the silence at bay. That night, I was half asleep, thumb lazily flicking through a thread about urban legends, when my phone rang. The sound was jarring, too loud, too sudden. I glanced at the screen, expecting to see a familiar name, but instead, it was just a string of zeros. No caller ID, no location, just 000000000. I hesitated. Who calls at 2:41 a.m.? Against my better judgment, I answered. At first, there was only static. Then, a voice, distorted, but unmistakably human. "Hello," I said, my own voice sounding small. The static crackled, then cleared. "Don't hang up," the voice said. It was flat, emotionless, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. "Who is this?" A pause. "You left your window open." I sat up, heart pounding. My window was open, just a crack, letting in the cool night air. I looked around my room, suddenly hyper-aware of every shadow. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. The voice ignored me. "You shouldn't answer calls from numbers you don't recognize. It's not safe." I almost laughed, a nervous, brittle sound. "Yeah, I'm starting to get that." The line went dead. I stared at my phone, waiting for the call log to update, but there was nothing. No record of the call. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was a prank, maybe a glitch. But I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard the voice. "You left your window open." The next night, the phone rang again. Same number, same static. This time, I let it go to voicemail. But there was no message, just a faint, rhythmic tapping like someone drumming their fingers on glass. I started locking my window, double-checking the doors, unplugging my phone at night. But the calls kept coming. Sometimes they'd ring once and stop. Sometimes I'd answer and hear nothing but breathing. Once, the voice whispered my name, over and over, until I hung up, shaking. I told Jamie about it, half expecting her to laugh. Instead, she went pale. "You're not the only one," she said quietly. "There's a thread online, people getting calls from that number. Weird stuff happens after. People go missing. Or worse." I found the thread. Hundreds of posts, all with the same story. Late night calls from 000, 000, 0000. Voices that knew things they shouldn't. Warnings that made no sense until it was too late. Some people claimed the calls predicted accidents, break-ins, even deaths. Others said the calls were a test. If you answered, you were marked. I started to notice other things. My phone would glitch, apps opening and closing on their own. Sometimes, I'd hear faint whispers through the speaker, even when I wasn't on a call. Once, I woke up to find my phone recording, the screen filled with static and shadows that didn't belong in my room. The paranoia set in. I stopped answering unknown numbers. I changed my phone, my number, even my SIM card. But the calls kept coming. Always at night. Always from the same number. One night, desperate for answers, I picked up. "Why are you doing this?" I demanded. The voice was clearer this time, almost gentle. "You shouldn't have answered. Now you know." "Know what?" A pause. "They're watching. Through the screens. Through the wires. You let them in." My blood ran cold. "Who's watching?" The voice laughed, a sound like glass breaking. The call ended. My phone screen flickered, then went black. When it came back on, there was a new message, a photo of my building, taken from the street. The timestamp was 2:41 a.m. I called the police, but there was nothing they could do. The number didn't exist. The photo couldn't be traced. I tried to convince myself it was a sick joke, but deep down, I knew better. The call stopped after that. But sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of movement in my phone's reflection, a shadow, just out of frame. And every so often, I'll get a text from an unknown number. "Are you awake?" The voice on the other end knew things about me no one should know. And I'm not the only one. The calls are spreading, more people, more stories, more warnings. It's like a web, tightening around us, one ring at a time. Some say technology connects us. But sometimes, it lets things in that should stay out. When I was a kid, I was afraid of the dark. Not in the way most kids are, with monsters under the bed or shadows in the closet. My fear was more specific, more persistent. It was the window. Every night, as the world outside faded into black, I'd lie in bed and stare at the rectangle of glass above my desk, convinced that something was watching me from the other side. My parents tried everything: night lights, lullabies, even moving my bed to the other side of the room. But nothing helped. The fear wasn't just in my head. It was in my bones, a cold certainty that if I looked away, something would appear. I started sleeping with the covers pulled up to my chin, eyes fixed on the window, waiting. The nightmares started when I was 7. Always the same. I'd wake up to a tapping at the glass, soft at first, then more insistent. I'd sit up, heart pounding, and see a pale face pressed against the window, eyes too wide, mouth stretched in a grin that was all teeth. The face would whisper my name, the sound muffled by the glass, and I'd be frozen, unable to scream or move. Then I'd wake up, drenched in sweat, the tapping still echoing in my ears. I told my parents, of course. My mom would sit on the edge of my bed, smoothing my hair, telling me it was just a dream. My dad would check the window, show me the locked latch, the empty yard below. "See?" he'd say, trying to sound reassuring. "Nothing out there but the moon and the trees." But I could see the worry in their eyes, the way they'd glance at each other when they thought I wasn't looking. One night, I woke to the sound of voices in the hallway. My parents were arguing in hushed tones. "He's not sleeping," my mom whispered. "He's terrified." "It's just a phase," my dad replied, but he didn't sound convinced. I wanted to believe them. I wanted to believe it was all in my head. But then, one night, my mom found me standing at the window, eyes open but unseeing, my hand pressed against the glass. She shook me awake, her voice trembling. "You were sleepwalking," she said, but I could tell she was scared. After that, they started locking my bedroom door at night, just in case. Years passed. The nightmares faded, replaced by new fears: school, friends, growing up. I moved out, went to college, started a life of my own. I thought I'd outgrown my childhood fears. I was wrong. It started again last winter. I was back home, visiting my parents for the holidays. My old room was just as I'd left it, the same faded posters on the walls, the same desk under the window. The first night, I lay in bed, staring at the glass, feeling that old, familiar dread creeping in. I told myself it was just nostalgia, a trick of memory. But then, in the middle of the night, I heard a soft tapping at the window. My heart stopped. I sat up, every muscle tense, listening. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate. I forced myself to look, half expecting to see nothing but my own reflection. But there was something there. A shadow, just beyond the glass, too tall, too thin. I couldn't see its face, but I felt its eyes on me. Cold and hungry, I scrambled out of bed, heart racing, and ran to my parents' room. I must have sounded insane, babbling about shadows and tapping and nightmares come to life. My dad got up, grabbed a flashlight, and went outside to check. He found nothing, no footprints in the snow, no sign of anyone near the window. But when he came back inside, he was pale, his hands shaking. "There's something out there," he said quietly, so my mom wouldn't hear. I saw, I don't know, a shape. It was gone before I could get close. We didn't talk about it after that. I left the next day, telling myself it was just a bad dream, a trick of the light. But the fear followed me. Sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a glimpse of movement outside my window, a flicker of shadow, a flash of pale skin. I keep the curtains closed now, but it doesn't help. The feeling is always there, just beneath the surface. A few weeks ago, I got a message from an old friend who grew up on the same street. "Do you remember the window thing?" she wrote. "I still have nightmares about it. My little brother says he's seen it, too. I thought I'd outgrown my childhood fears. I was wrong. The night visitor is still out there, moving from window to window, waiting for someone to look away. Not all monsters hide under the bed. Some wait outside your window. Every family has its rules. Ours were simple. Be home for dinner, don't talk back, and never under any circumstances open the door at the end of the upstairs hallway after midnight." My parents never explained why. They just said it was for my own good, and that was that. The rest of the house was filled with warmth and laughter, Sunday pancakes, board games on rainy afternoons, the smell of my mother's baking drifting from the kitchen. But the locked room was different. It was always cold, even in summer, and the air around it felt heavy, like the house itself was holding its breath. As a kid, I'd ask about it, but my parents would just exchange glances and change the subject. "It's just storage," my dad would say, too quickly. "Nothing interesting in there." But I'd seen the way he checked the lock every night before bed, the way my mom avoided looking at the door when she walked past. Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear noises from inside, soft thumps, a faint whispering, like someone talking just out of earshot. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the good things. My family was close, the kind of close that made other people jealous. We had inside jokes, traditions, a sense of safety that felt unbreakable. But the older I got, the more the locked room gnawed at me. It was the one thing that didn't fit, the one secret in a house built on trust. On my 16th birthday, curiosity finally got the better of me. My parents were out at a late dinner, celebrating their anniversary. I was supposed to be asleep, but the house felt different without them, emptier, the shadows longer. I crept upstairs, heart pounding, and stood in front of the door. The key was always hidden in the drawer of my dad's desk. I'd found it once, years ago, and never forgotten. I held the key in my hand, hesitating. My parents' warning echoed in my mind. Never open that door after midnight. I wish I'd listened. The lock turned with a soft click. The door swung open, and a wave of cold air washed over me. The room was small, barely more than a closet, but it felt vast, the darkness inside swallowing the light from the hallway. I stepped inside, shivering. The walls were lined with old photographs, black and white portraits of people I didn't recognize, their eyes scratched out. In the center of the room was a wooden chair, facing the far wall. On the floor, a circle of salt, broken in one place. I knelt to examine the salt, my breath fogging in the cold. That's when I heard a whisper, so soft I thought I imagined it. "Help me." I spun around, heart racing. The room was empty, but the air felt charged, electric. I backed toward the door, but it slammed shut, trapping me inside. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices, pleading, angry, desperate. I pounded on the door, screaming for help. The voices rose in a cacophony, swirling around me. I covered my ears, but it didn't help. The sound was inside my head, filling every corner of my mind. Then, suddenly, silence. The air grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned, slowly, and saw a figure standing in the corner, a woman, her face blurred, her eyes hollow. She reached out a hand, and I felt a wave of sadness so deep it nearly knocked me to my knees. "Why are you here?" she whispered. "I wanted to know," I stammered. "What is this place?" She looked at me, and for a moment, I saw my mother's face, twisted with grief. "This is where we keep our secrets," she said. "This is where the past lives." The door burst open, and my parents rushed in, their faces pale with fear. My mom pulled me into her arms, sobbing. My dad stood in the doorway, staring at the woman in the corner. "I told you never to open this door," he said, his voice shaking. The woman faded, the cold lifting. My parents led me out, locking the door behind us. We sat in the hallway, the three of us, shivering in the aftermath. That night, they told me the truth. The room had belonged to my aunt, my mother's sister, who'd vanished one winter night when she was 16, the same age I was. They'd kept the room locked ever since, hoping to keep whatever took her from coming back. But the house remembered. The room remembered. And now, so did I. After that night, the house felt different. The warmth was still there, but it was tinged with something else, a sadness, a weight. The locked room stayed locked, but sometimes, late at night, I'd hear the whispering start up again, soft and mournful. My parents always said, "Never open that door after midnight." I wish I'd listened. Some secrets are better left locked away. But curiosity is a powerful thing. Have you noticed the patterns? I have, and I'm not the only one. It's easy to think of these stories as isolated incidents, just nightmares, coincidences, the kind of things that happen to other people. But if you look closer, if you start connecting the dots, something else emerges. A shadow in the hallway, a neighbor who vanishes, a phone that shouldn't ring, a visitor at the window, a room that's never meant to be opened. Different places, different faces, but the same chill running through them all. The same sense that something is watching, waiting, just out of sight. I've spent more nights than I care to admit scrolling through forums, reading confessions, piecing together fragments of other people's lives. Some of you have messaged me, shared your own stories, strange knocks at the door, voices whispering your name, dreams that bleed into waking life. It's not just me. It's not just you. There's a pattern here, a web that stretches further than any of us realize. Some in the community call it the night's veil, a thin line between our world and something else, something hungry. Others say it's a test, that only those who notice the signs are in danger. There are theories, of course, about ley lines, cursed buildings, haunted technology. Some people laugh it off, call it mass hysteria, but the stories keep coming. The details change, but the feeling is always the same. A cold certainty that we're not alone. Maybe that's why we tell these stories, why we gather here in the dark corners of the internet, trading warnings and theories like talismans. There's comfort in knowing you're not the only one. But there's a price, too. The more you see, the harder it is to look away. The more you know, the more the night seems to notice you. So what do you think? Have you seen the patterns? Have you felt the night watching? Share your theories, your stories, your warnings. Maybe together, we can make sense of it. Or maybe we're just drawing the night's attention. But the night isn't over yet. There's one more story you need to hear. If you're still watching, it's already too late. I used to think the night was just a backdrop, a time for sleep, for dreams, for stories whispered in the dark. But I was wrong. The night is alive. It's patient, and it's hungry. It started with little things, the kind you brush off in the daylight. A shadow that lingered too long in the corner of my room. The feeling of being watched, even with the curtains drawn and the doors locked. I'd tell myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks after too many sleepless nights and too many stories. But the feeling grew, spreading like a stain. The night pressed in, thick and suffocating, until I couldn't tell where it ended and I began. I tried to keep the lights on, to drown out the darkness with noise and screens. But the bulbs would flicker, the power would cut out, and my phone would fill with static. Sometimes, I'd hear voices in the hum of the refrigerator, in the whir of the fan, whispers threading through the silence, calling my name. I remembered the stories, the shadow in the hallway, the neighbor who vanished, the phone that shouldn't ring, the visitor at the window, the locked room. I realized they weren't just stories. They were warnings. One night, I decided to stay awake until dawn, just to prove to myself that I was still in control. I watched the clock tick past midnight, then 1, then 2. The world outside was silent, the city's lights swallowed by the dark. At 3:07 a.m., I heard it a soft, insistent whisper just outside my window. My heart pounded. I tried to ignore it, but the whisper grew louder, more urgent, until it filled the room. I got up, drawn to the window against my will. The glass was cold beneath my fingers. Outside, the night was deeper than I'd ever seen, a void that seemed to pulse and breathe. I saw shapes moving in the darkness, shadows with too many arms, faces pressed against the glass, eyes that glowed with hunger. I stumbled back, but the room was shrinking, the walls closing in. The night was inside now, seeping through the cracks, curling around my ankles, whispering secrets in a language I almost understood. I tried to run, but every door led to the same hallway, the same locked room, the same endless night. I called out for help, but my voice was swallowed by the dark. I remembered what Jamie had said, what Mr. Ellis had forgotten, what my parents had tried to hide. The night is a web, and once you're caught, it doesn't let go. I don't know how long I wandered, minutes, hours, days. Time doesn't work the same in the night. I saw flashes of other lives, other stories, faces I recognized from old photographs, voices from forgotten dreams. I saw you, too, watching from the other side of the screen, your face lit by the blue glow, your eyes wide with fear. The night sees you. It knows your name. I realized then that the only way out was through. I had to tell the story, to pass it on, to warn others. That's how the night works. It feeds on secrets, on silence, on the things we're too afraid to say out loud. But if we share the story, if we shine a light into the darkness, maybe we can hold it back. Maybe we can survive until morning. So here it is. The night is alive. It's watching you, right now, as you listen. It waits for you to turn off the lights, to close your eyes, to let your guard down. It slips through the cracks, through the screens, through the spaces between heartbeats. It remembers every fear, every secret, every story you've ever tried to forget. If you're still watching, you're part of it now. The night knows you. It's patient. It will wait. But you're not alone. We're all in this together, bound by the stories we share and the fears we can't escape. Maybe that's enough. Maybe, if we keep telling the stories, if we keep the lights on for each other, the night will have to wait a little longer. So, if you feel the darkness pressing in, if you hear your name whispered in the silence, remember, you're not the only one. Share this story. Leave a light on. And whatever you do, don't look out the window after midnight. Some things can't be unseen. But maybe, together, we can survive until morning. If you've made it this far, you're braver than most. Or maybe, you just haven't seen what's waiting in the dark. We tell ourselves that stories are just stories, that the things we fear can't follow us once the lights are on and the screen goes dark. But if tonight has taught us anything, it's that fear doesn't care about logic. It doesn't care about daylight or locked doors or the comfort of a familiar room. Fear is patient. It waits in the quiet moments, in the spaces between heartbeats, in the shadows that stretch just a little too long. Maybe you recognize something in these stories, a flicker of memory, a chill that crept up your spine, a detail that felt too close to home. Maybe you've heard the whispers at 3:07 a.m., or caught a glimpse of something moving just out of sight. Maybe you've wondered, late at night, if you're really alone. If so, you're not. Not really. That's the secret the night keeps from us. We're all connected by the things we fear, by the stories we share, by the questions we're too afraid to ask out loud. There's a strange kind of comfort in that, isn't there? Knowing that someone else has stood in the same darkness, heard the same footsteps, felt the same cold breath on the back of their neck. That's why we gather here, in this strange little corner of the internet, trading stories and warnings and theories. It's not just about scaring ourselves, it's about shining a light. So, if you have a story, something you've seen, or heard, or felt, don't keep it to yourself. Share it in the comments. Tell us what keeps you up at night. Maybe your story is the one someone else needs to hear. Maybe it's the thread that ties all of this together, the clue that helps us understand what's really lurking in the dark. And if you have a theory, a pattern you've noticed, a detail that everyone else missed, let us know. The more we share, the more we see. The more we see, the less power the night has over us. Or at least, that's what I like to believe. Of course, there are always more stories. The night is never truly over. There are whispers in every city, every town, every lonely house at the end of a quiet street. There are doors that should never be opened, windows that should never be looked through, phones that should never be answered. And there are people, maybe even you, who know just a little too much to ever really sleep soundly again. So, as this video ends and the screen goes dark, remember, the stories don't stop here. The night is patient. It's always waiting, just outside the circle of light, just beyond the edge of what we're willing to believe. And sometimes, when you least expect it, it finds a way in. If you're still with me, thank you for listening, for sharing, for being part of this strange, haunted community. Don't forget to leave your story, your theory, your warning. And if you want more, subscribe, because the night always has another secret to share. Sleep tight, if you can.